Okay, so this week's parsha is Parshat Bechukotai. It is the last parsha in the book of Vayikra. And it's often coupled with Bahar, so we don't always get to give it the full attention that it deserves. But I wanted to think about the idea of walking, and especially walking with God in this week's parsha. So we can see that in the very first pasuk, where we get the name Parshat Bechukotai from, in Vayikra, it says, "Im bechukotai telechu ve'et mitzvotai tishmaru ve'asitem otam." Right? If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, then and it goes on to tell you all of the wonderful things that God will do for you. And here, right, it says to follow my commandments is how they translate im bechukotai telechu. But you could say, quite literally, if you walk in my commandments, like if you walk in my ways, then all these good things will happen to you. And it's just an interesting choice of verb to use the word halach, to walk, as opposed to like the more normative, like where we see tishmoru from shamor, right, to observe my commandments, to accept my laws, to do my laws. But to walk in my laws feels like it evokes, at least for me, this idea of walking in general. And the question is, what does it mean to walk? What is like special or unique about walking? And so here, I want us to look at a pasuk from Zechariah and to think about how we can maybe connect that back into our pasuk. And to say that I saw this originally in an article or within the book of Yeshayahu Leibowitz, a 20th century scholar in Israel. I could not find that page again in my notes, so I used someone else's thoughts at the bottom here, but certainly learned in both people's names. So here we see in Zechariah that God is talking to the people. And again, right, he says, if you walk in my paths, and tishmor, and you keep my charge, then good things will happen to you, and I will permit you to walk mahalchim bein ha'omdim ha'ela. And so here it says, right, I will permit you to move amongst my attendants. And the Radak here explains who are those omdim? What does it mean to be omed? Is it like the guard at Buckingham Palace who stands still? Is that what omdim means? And the Radak says, no, these are the angels. Right, that angels are fixed in their ways. And so Yeshayahu Leibowitz, and then again, this Rabbi Eli Mansour in New York, point out that this idea of walking is an inherently human trait, right? And that walking is sort of like substitute for always moving, always growing. Angels cannot walk, they can only stand. They're the omdim. And people have the benefit of being allowed to be the holchim, the learners. And I think sometimes, right, we aspire to be like angels. When we stand in the Kedusha, we stand like the angels stand. But in reality, right, angels can't carry out commandments. They can't learn and grow. They have a state of perfection, but they're stuck in that state of perfection. And they don't know the joy of learning something new or mastering a new skill or being able to progress forward. So I thought that this quote from Rabbi Eli Mansour is particularly beautiful, that human beings differ from angels in their ability to change, to grow, and improve. Angels cannot change. They remain the same from the moment they come into existence until they expire, whatever that means, if angels can expire. For this reason, the prophets generally describe angels as omdim, standing. Angels stand only in one place, unable to advance or progress forward. Human beings, by contrast, are often referred to as holchim, walking, referring to their capacity to progress, to move forward, to grow, to work on their characters and become better. If a person remains stagnant and complacent, if he has no interest in improving himself and advancing to the next level in religious observance and character refinement, then he has negated his most basic human quality. Right, so here it seems to me that this choice of the word halach, im bechukotai telechu, is God saying it's not enough to follow. Follow is actually like a very hollow English translation now, right? It really means if you are willing to grow in my laws, if you're willing to improve, if you're willing to challenge yourself, then all these good things will happen to you. Walking is not, simply like walking around the block, but it's this commitment to growth in some way. And in fact, the Baal Shem Tov says that God's laws are meant to be walked in because laws are not static, right? Laws are an ever evolving system, and that therefore we shouldn't become settled or fixed in our ways, but we should push ourselves to deeper connections, right? So far, I think that the word halach is really, it's a charge. And I included this little part from Brachot, because I think, right, it makes it, Rabbi Abahu makes it very clear. Makom sheba'alei tshuva omdin, tzadikim gmurin einam omdim, right? Those who are not fully fledged righteous people stand, and those who are righteous, they're always on the move. You cannot become a tzaddik gamur without being willing to take a walk in that way. And Rabbi Daniel Sperber, who is on my mind right now as I prepare for my graduation next month, gave a beautiful speech at the 2014 graduation, and it was quoted by someone in I think the Jewish Forward, which is the link here, that innovation is the hallmark of Jewish tradition. The petrification, the stagnation of halachic tradition, that is the breach of tradition. The very word halacha from halach means to progress, right? And so I think that like you cannot get more clear than that, which is to say that we don't always think about our halachic system as one that is evolving and ever changing, but like think about something that's not charged, like women's smicha, right? But something as basic as how to apply the laws of Shabbat or the laws of kashrut to a microwave oven. Right? It's a relatively new technology that is not really an oven. Do you treat it like an oven? Do you treat it like a solar oven? Is it electric? Does it create warmth? Right? These are all questions that halacha had to address to keep up. And as technology grows and grows, right? How to interact in a hotel with a door and a bathroom where the toilet flushes and the sinks turn on when you put your hands under, right? All of these things are things that halacha, if it was not ever evolving and moving, would have a hard time addressing. And so being reminded in this parsha about being someone who is halach in the chukot of Hashem, being someone who walks in that way, is to remind us how important it is to honor the evolution of our system. It reminded me of a scene from the play or the movie Inherit the Wind. I don't know how many people here have seen or heard it. It was a very central component of my informal education as a child. I read it with a group of friends. We sort of performed it like, with books out. And for those who don't know, Inherit the Wind is a play that unfolds over the course of a very famous court case where a teacher is on trial for teaching Darwinism in his high school class. And two lawyers are brought in from out of town to prosecute and defend the teacher respectively. And these two lawyers have known each other since high school, or since law school, sorry. And part of the interesting character development of the play is sort of figuring out how they interact with each other. They used to feel like they were on the same page, and now they are on such radically opposing ends of this really charged issue, right? Evolution was like women's smicha, right? It wasn't about microwave ovens. It was like something very costly was at stake. And so the prosecutor, Matthew Harrison Brady, asks the defense attorney, Henry Drummond, he says, "Why is it, my old friend, that you've moved so far away from me?" Right? He feels neglected, right? He feels abandoned. Here he is defending God and the lack of evolutionary education in schools. And he thought his friend Henry Drummond would support him, would be his second chair, would be on his team, and yet he's not. And I've always loved this line. Henry Drummond says, "All motion is relative, Matt. Maybe it's you who've moved away by standing still." right? So Henry Drummond is saying, well, I kept my perspective, but to keep your perspective, you have to walk, you have to keep growing, you have to challenge yourself. And that you, Matt, Harrison Brady, right, when you stopped doing that, your distance grew, but it wasn't because I was moving, it's because you stopped moving. And so by using this active word of halach, I think that God is warning the people that they don't have the luxury of standing still, which is really actually akin to moving backwards, but that to walk in God's laws, you must constantly be moving forwards. So for me, that's like the first piece. This is part one of the Parsha half hour, right? Is that this first opening line of the promise for good things for Bnei Israel, if they follow God's laws, is to remind us that to do that, we have to keep walking and we have to keep moving and growing and evolving. I can pause if anyone has thoughts, questions, ideas. Okay. So then this chapter, or this, it's really only a few verses, this segment ends with a very similar pasuk that puts us into another thinking about what it means to walk with someone else. Did you want to say something, Mark? I just see you here, so I didn't know if you wanted to. Okay. So at the end, right, this is verse Yud Bet, pasuk Yud Bet, verse 12, and this was verse 3. And so, right, it's only a short 9 psukim later. It says, "V'hit halachli b'tochachem, v'hiyitem lachem Elohim, v'atem tiyu li la'am." Right, so if you do all these things and all these good things happen, the sort of crowning good thing that happens is that God pledges to walk in our midst. And the way that it is presented, I'm always nervous to do this around people who know a lot of Hebrew. So Mark, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I've said this before Israelis, and I think that it's right, is that hit halachti is in the hit pa'el. And my understanding of the hit pa'el is that it's usually reflexive, right? Like we learned this in elementary school. If you say lihit labesh, it means you're getting yourself dressed as opposed to someone else dressing you. Right. And so in this case, God is hit halech. God is walking God's self amongst us in some way. But the hit ba'el form also is used to describe mutual actions. So lihit kasher means two people calling each other. Lihit katev is about written correspondence. When you and I do something together, right, that's when we become a reflexive unit. And so what is happening, okay, good. Whew, Mark says I did it right. So if God is saying, V'hit halachti b'tochachem, perhaps what is being suggested is that God is offering Bnei Israel a chance to walk with God, right? It's not just about walking in God's ways, right? It's reciprocal. Thank you, that's very helpful. It's a reciprocal action. God is not walking alone within Bnei Israel. God is saying, let's walk together. And that's the way that will be God and people in relationship, with some kind of reciprocal relationship, which I think is beautiful. And I want to skip this far now for 1 second, because it links back Rabbi Foreman, who is the rabbi who runs the Aleph Beta Parsha project. It's an excellent resource for everyone. They have these short little movies that are animated for adults. They're really great on the Parsha. He talks about how Rashi talks about, and Rabbi Foreman introduced me to, the idea that v'hit halachti, the reflexive use of the word walking, was used all the way back in Parshat Breshit. And that is when in chapter 3, just to remind you, the people have eaten from Adam and Chava, or Ish and Isha, have eaten from the tree of knowledge because the snake might have encouraged them to do that. And they get nervous, right? And so v'yishma'u et kol Hashem Elokim mithalech began leruach hayom. The people hear the sound here, right, of God moving about, but literally God walking God's self, or God asking to walk with Adam and Chava at the breezy time of day. But they've done something wrong, and so they hide from God amongst the trees, right? Kind of like if you have a pet and you hear the pet chewing something and you say like, what have you gotten into, that they like run and hide behind the couch because they don't want to get in trouble, right? Or to compare them to children, right? My children often disappear as soon as something bad has happened. V'yikra Hashem Elokim el ha'adam vayomer lo ayeka. And God calls out to the human and says, where are you? Right? And here, I think that there is this sadness on God's part, right? Ayeka is a little bit like echa. It's often used in like a sort of sad, lamenting tone, as opposed to like epho, right? Epho ata might have been the right, like modern Hebrew way of using that word, like where are you? And so ayeka is like, I came to take a walk with you and you were gone. Like you did something wrong and you just abandoned this reciprocal relationship. And it takes from Adam and Chava, from the Ish and Ishto, all the way until us getting ready, right? We start Bamidbar by taking a census. We're trying to prepare to enter the land of Israel. It takes all of that formation of nationhood, from like building the family units to Shmot, to starting a nation, to being freed, to accepting the Torah, to wandering in the desert and making tons of mistakes. We have to be standing like on the brink of entering Israel, right? Which is the preposition, the presupposition of what is happening here, to be ready to actually be offered that walk again, right? The first walk is a very unsuccessful trial. God says, take a walk with me. And the people say, uh-oh, and they run away. And here God is saying, listen, I'm ready to try again. Take a walk with me and we'll walk together, and you'll be the Am and I'll be the God, right? The Elohim. And we'll have this reciprocal relationship. And that whether it's like a trust issue, right? It's hard to understand the ways of God, but that it's somehow Bnei Israel has shown themselves to be prepared. Right. And again, what does that mean to be prepared? I would say that it means that they're ready to walk. They're ready to evolve, to grow, to continue learning, not to run away when they've done sort of the wrong thing, which is a beautiful tie-in maybe to the v'hi talachli piece of it. But the other piece of what it means, v'hi talachli, like what does it mean to take a walk? Sforno says, oh, it means halech ana va'ana lo el makom echad bilvad. It means God will go anywhere, not just to one holy spot. Don't be worried if you can't make it to shul. Don't be worried that the Beit HaMikdash is not here right now, right? God does not only show up in the spaces that we've sort of formally created for God. God will show up anywhere that we ask him to be, ask God to be, right? And so I think Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel says it very beautifully. This is a long paragraph, and maybe I'm not going to actually read it out loud. It's in English, everyone can read it. But to say, and he also references beautifully the Adam and Chava component, right, of God calling out. But Rabbi Heschel's argument is that God is searching for us as much as the other way around, right? So we assume that God is like this totally knowing, powerful creature, or creation, being, divine entity, whatever we call God, and that God has no need maybe for the people. But Rabbi Heschel says, no, God needs us just as much as the way that we need God. And so how do we find God? We have to put ourselves in God's walking path. We have to position ourselves in a place where we can be found walking in God's ways, right? God finds us when we do mitzvot. God finds us when we learn Torah. God finds us when we're nice to the stranger and the widow and the convert, right? Like I think there are a lot of different ways of thinking about what it means to walk in God's ways, and all of them are good. And that if we put ourselves there, we'll find God, and then hitalachti, then God will say, take a walk with me. And we'll like have this really intimate and close relationship. So before I started recording, I said that I had originally done this learning in memory of my father, whose yortzeit is next Thursday. And so I beg everyone's indulgence that I may share one quick thought about him in relation to this, which is to say that my father was someone who could not sit still. He was the kind of person whose leg was always shaking or his fingers were always tapping, and it would drive me crazy. And he would tell me that his grandmother used to tell him that he was sitting on shvilkas, which is like the Yiddish for saying he couldn't sit still. But that he also was someone who was always willing to move forward. He always wanted to challenge the status quo. And I would say he did not just strive to walk in God's laws, but maybe to like dance and loudly sing his way down the path. And that one of the things I learned from my dad is that sometimes people are not perfect, right? And there was like a time where I could see that he was beginning to lose that path, and that instead of like Adam and Chava sort of running away from it when he couldn't find it, I was very impressed when I saw him rededicate his commitment to finding that way through going to davening more, through extra classes at the shul, through relationships. And that I think that God's promise, that ultimate bracha of being granted like the gift or the blessing of being able to walk with God is tantalizing, right? Like, could you imagine being able to take a walk with God? It's like one of those questions, like, what would you say if you met this person in history? Like, what would you say if all of a sudden you got to take a walk around the block with God? And it's not an easy task to be in the path, to intensively learn Torah, to follow commandments, but knowing that that's the way to find God, I think makes it a valuable and worthy struggle. And so I wish us all that opportunity to find a way to bring God into our lives in a way that feels as though we're offering up our availability for a walk, and to remember that walking is the way that we engage with God, that God doesn't want the Omdim, the angels, right, to be on earth, that our task is to walk and to challenge and to move in a way that feels like we're making ourselves available to God. And again, I welcome questions, pushback, thoughts, ideas.
It's beautiful. Thank you. I just wanted to add just another parallel with Islam. Is that Sharia also means to walk is a path. Sharia, it's exactly the same as halakha.
It's a little hard to hear, Mark, but maybe it sounds like Elizabeth.
Sorry, I'm just saying. I'm sorry. I'm just saying that the word Sharia in Islam is the same as halakha. It means a path.
That's fascinating. Huh. I like that, especially because I think those are two religions that we think of as very stagnant at times when observed.
Well, what I tell my students is that Orthodox is a misnomer, that it's really orthoprax, both in Islam and Judaism, as opposed to Christianity, where there is an orthodox, straightness of dogma.
Interesting. I like that a lot. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think there's something exhausting about the idea, right? That like you can't learn it all and then just do it, because there's like a never-ending cycle of learning and growing and challenging oneself. But that again, that's why God uses that word again to say like there's such a great prize if you're willing to make the effort to constantly be learning new things. Wonderful. Well, I wish everyone a good end of their week. Shabbat Shalom. I'm going to stop the share here and the recording.